Oh yes, this is a beaut. Do you guys want to find out how you can win this for free? Make sure to stay tuned to the end of the video. Hello and welcome back to the channel, everybody. I am your host, Vortex, from MobileMusicPro.com, your home for mobile music production. And if you are new to the channel, what we do here is try to create weekly videos teaching people how to produce music. Our goal here is to get as many people producing music as possible, and the easiest, most accessible way to begin making music is on your iOS device. So if you do want to help us out on our mission, make sure to smash those likes, subscribe, and share out the show. Now today's video is a first part in a new ongoing series where we're going to dive into the fundamentals of music production by showing you how to use the basic Cubasis 3 plugins. And the first video in that new series will be today's video covering Cubasis's Studio EQ plugin. Now, balancing all your instruments together inside the mix has never been an easy task. But fortunately, Cubasis does come equipped with a great stock EQ and plenty of presets to help you guys get started. You see, EQ is really nothing more than a volume dial, except instead of turning up and down the entire track, you're only affecting the volume of very specific frequencies. The overall goal of EQ is to make all those sounds and instruments in your track work together and complement each other, so that no single sound is sticking out too much in the mix, distracting and taking away our attention from the rest of the song. And plus, we'll be getting into all the different lingo, such as cutting all the lows or boosting the highs, and we'll be giving you a few real-world examples of how to properly use EQ so that you can easily get started improving your mixes as soon as possible. Alright, now with that intro aside, let's get right into showing you how to use the Studio EQ plugin inside Cubasis 3. Hello and welcome everybody. We are wishing you the happiest of the happiest from Mobile Music Pro to wherever you are in the world. We just wanted to quickly remind you that the principles and the fundamentals that we'll be talking about in today's video can really be applied to any EQ inside any DAW. As we said, EQ is generally used to make sure that your instruments sound good together. Making sure all your instruments fit together will make your track overall sound less muddy, more crisp, and more hard-hitting. Now to start off with, all audio is essentially made up of frequencies. The human ear can hear 20 Hz all the way up to 20,000 Hz. This is called the frequency spectrum. Now let's go ahead and pull up an EQ and show you what we mean. So what we'll be working with today is Cubasis 3's Studio EQ. So to pull that up, what we'll do is we'll look at the menu on the far left hand side, and if that is minimized, you can go ahead and click that arrow to expand that out. And what we're going to do is expand our Insert Effects tab, and in there by default, you'll always have a Studio EQ on every single one of your tracks. So let's go ahead and bring that up by tapping on the E. And of course, you do have to make sure that it is engaged by making sure this button is on instead of off. So now that we have our Studio EQ pulled up, by default we will have our default preset here, and we can see that by tapping on Studio EQ and going to Factory Presets. We can see that the default is highlighted here. Now let's expand this up and make this a little bit bigger. Now, just a moment ago, we spoke about the frequency spectrum, and that is what we see here. As you can see, we are ranging from 20 Hz all the way up to 20,000 Hz or 20 kHz. Each one of your individual instruments will live somewhere in these ranges. Now, of course, you'll have instruments bleed over from different ranges, but generally, there is a spot for every single one of your instruments. And we can quickly pull up a cheat sheet for you so you can see what we mean. Now you can find this image anywhere on the internet just by typing in EQ cheat sheet, and there really is a bunch of these, but generally they're all about the same here, and all of them will display the vocals, winds, strings, drums, and keys in their proper frequency range. So if we zoom in here, we can see that the vocals, to get a good fullness and boominess, we want to make sure to boost around 120 to 240 Hz. And then we also want to make sure that we have some presence here. So to boost that presence and give some of that sheen, we want to boost around the 5K to 10K range. And again, that is the vocal area right here. And we can go all the way down the range here from saxophones, tenor saxes, trumpets, trombones, tubas, and so forth, all the way into the string sections with violins, cellos, and more. So now that you can understand that every single instrument does have its own frequency range, we want to make sure to keep those instruments in that range. It's almost like a stack of drawers. You want to make sure that every single one fits properly. So let's return back to Cubasis and our Studio EQ. we can see that we do have 4 bands here labeled 1, 2, 3, 4. And generally EQs do start out with these 4 bands to separate everything into the lows, mids, upper mids, and finally the highs. Now to achieve the effect of placing instruments in specific frequencies, we use something called filters. By default, we have the high-pass filter here on the left and the low-pass filter here on the right. And the reason why we call those filters the low-pass and high-pass is because one lets the high frequencies pass through and cuts off the lows, and one lets the low frequencies pass through and cuts off the highs. So if we did want to cut out the lows, for example, we would grab our number 1 filter over here, tap on that, and drag that down and to the right. Now that would cut our lows, allowing the highs to pass through. Let's go back to the default here. Now this time, if we wanted to do the opposite and boost the lows instead of cut the lows, we would then go down and change our filter type down to a shelf filter. So we would go down to the type, tap on that once more, and now we have a shelf filter. And what we would do is, instead of tap and drag down to the right, we would tap and drag up and to the right. Now this will again boost our lows instead of cut our lows. And we can apply everything that we've done here, just the opposite on the far right-hand side as well. So let's go back to our default real quick and show you that. So let's go ahead and cut the highs. So we'll tap on our 4th band here, our 4th filter. This is again our low-pass filter because we're going to cut the highs and allow the lows to pass. So we'll simply tap on that and drag that to the left. And now what we've done is cut our highs, which again means cutting out those high frequencies. So now let's go ahead and do the opposite of that. So we'll return to our default, and let's change this now to a shelf filter. And let's tap on our number 4 and drag that up and to the left. Now what we've effectively done is boosted the highs for this track, which again is the opposite of what we just did, which was cut the highs from this track. Now, generally speaking, the rule of thumb that you want to follow is to do gentle boosts and surgical cuts. Now, what we mean by that is only boost things very gently, not to the extreme like we're doing here. We're talking about just a little bit here and there, and we'll show you this in a little bit more detail in just a moment. And what we mean by surgical cuts is using something called notch or peak filters. So let's take a look at what that looks like now. So let's go back to our default, and let's go ahead and change our number 3 filter here to a peak filter. And what we're going to take a look at is filters number 2 and 3. And what these are by default are something called peak filters. And what that means is when you drag them up, you can see that it kind of forms a peak. Same with the 2nd filter here, we'll drag the 2nd one up. Again, kind of forming a peak. And what determines how steep the slope of this peak is something called the Q setting. And that lives right down here, right next to the filter type. So we have our filter type on the left, and then our Q setting on the right. And by default here, you can see it's set to 0.5. Let's see what that looks like when we increase that. So we'll increase this by tapping and dragging up. And as you can see, that is making that curve much more steep. And when you drag it down, it'll make it less so. This type of filter comes in extremely handy for something called sweeping, which we'll show you how to do in just a minute. So before we show you this on a real sound, let's go ahead and take a look at one more cheat sheet. We'll close this and go to an EQ cheat sheet. And what we have here is an infographic letting you know when to boost and when to cut. So if we look over here, we can see that the boom and rumble of something like a kick lives right around here in around the 60 to 150 Hz range. And we have our sub-frequencies living over here in the 50 to 100 Hz range. So when we talk about doing things to vocals like increasing their presence, making them more crisp, or adding some sheen, this is essentially all we're talking about is boosting frequencies. Boosting specific frequencies between the 10 and 20 kHz range will give you more sheen, and boosting between the 5 and 10 kHz range will make your vocals sound a little bit more crisp. And again, you can Google all of these graphics, but we'll make sure to link to them in the description below. So again, this was an infographic that shows you the general results that you'll get from cutting and boosting certain frequencies. So let's go ahead now and go back to Cubasis. Let's return to our default preset, and let's go ahead and start showing you a couple things here. So let's put on the headphones real quick. And now we're going to do a couple of things like boost and cut the lows and boost and cut the highs on a real world sound. So what we have here is this guitar sample. So we'll play that real quick for you. Alright, perfect. Now let's go ahead and cut out all the lows. And then we're going to cut out all the highs, leaving only the mid frequencies. So you can see what it sounds like when there's no lows, and you can see what it sounds like when there's no highs, and you'll be able to see what it sounds like when we just leave the mids. What you'll effectively get from this sound is what we call the telephone sound, because it does kind of sound like the sound is coming through a telephone, which generally doesn't have very many low or high frequencies and tends to stay in just the mid-range frequencies because those travel better and faster through a telephone wire. So again, first we're going to take out the lows and then we'll take out the highs. So let's do this now. So you can see there we took out all of the lows. Now let's go ahead and boost some of these lows and do the opposite of what we just did. So let's change this to a shelf filter here, and let's hit play. So as you can see there, we boosted these lows. Now let's do the opposite and start cutting and boosting some of the highs. We'll go back to our default preset there and hit play. So as you can hear, what we did there is started cutting some of the highs. Now let's go ahead and boost some of the highs. So we'll go back and change our filter, and let's hit play. Alright, perfect. As you can see, we were boosting the highs there all the way from the 1 kilohertz to the 10 kilohertz range. Now let's go ahead and apply that telephone effect like we said we were going to do in the beginning. So we'll go back and go back to our default setting, and let's hit play. So as you can see, what it's really doing is turning down the volume considerably there on all of the lower and higher frequencies, leaving only the mid frequencies, which overall drops the volume of the track to a considerably lower level. And now I quickly want to show you guys something called additive or subtractive EQ, which is essentially using the sweep method to either boost or cut unwanted frequencies. So let's quickly show you how to do that now. So what we actually are going to do is create a peak filter and then sweep through some of these frequencies and get rid of some of the ones that we don't want. So let's go ahead and hit play and do that now. So I definitely hear some tingy noise right here that I don't want, and in addition to this, around the 5K range is where a lot of the vocals sit. So we're definitely going to cut this right now. So let's make sure we are looping all the way across here, and let's hit play. Alright, that's much better. And that's essentially all the sweep method is again sweeping through those frequencies and finding unwanted frequencies that you don't want and either cutting those or finding frequencies that you do like and boosting those up. And now what I want to show you is some real world examples of some of these loops and how we would EQ them if they were in a real track. So let's go ahead and start out with that electric guitar. Now what I would do first is select one of the presets that Steinberg already created and then tweak from there. So let's hit play. So I like that preset right there, but there are some frequencies that I'm not quite happy about, so I usually just end up touching those a little bit up, just a little. Let's do that now. Now let's go ahead and hear the difference between those two. So we'll A-B those now, starting with the effect disengaged. Alright, now again, the idea is to not really hear too much of a difference here between the original and what we've EQ'd, because we do still want to keep most of the original transients and really the soul of the sound intact. All we want to do here is make sure that this fits in with the rest of our instruments. So to do that, we usually only require a couple of gentle boosts and a couple gentle cuts. Alright, now it's on to the acoustic guitar. Alright, once again, we'll start with the default preset and go from there. Alright, that sounds pretty good. Let's go ahead and A-B that, and we will disable the effect first and then engage it while it's playing. Alright, once again, a very subtle effect, but all of these subtle effects, when applied to all of the different tracks, definitely do add up to make a pretty big difference. Alright, and now what we have for you is a loop that we just created today inside of Cubasis 3, using almost only the sounds from our brand new sample pack. Oh, and this single riser effect sound is also not coming from the sample pack. So everything except for the Ravencroft piano and the riser sound is coming from our brand new sample pack that we just released for free at mobilemusicpro.com. And we are running a contest on that right now, so definitely check that out at mobilemusicpro.com/contest. Now if we take a look here, it's a rather simple loop. We just have our drums here, which is made up of our kick track, open hat, hats, hats 2, and it's all connected to a drum bus here. And then again we have that riser, bass track, guitar track, piano track, and finally a pad track. Once again, all the sounds here coming from our brand new sample pack, except the riser and the Ravencroft piano sound. So what we're going to do is play this loop for you with all of the tracks properly EQ'd, and then we're going to go ahead and disengage the EQ for all of these tracks and hear what that sounds like. And finally, we'll re-engage it so you guys can hear the difference. What I want you to listen for is the lack of punchiness and a bunch more muddiness that is created from all of these different sounds playing in very similar frequency ranges. Once we re-engage all the effects, what you should hear is the loop sounding much more punchy and much more crisp. So let's again hear this now with all of the effects currently engaged. Alright, perfect. Now what we're going to do is disable the EQ for all of these different tracks and then play it back for you. Alright, now we've gone ahead and disengaged the EQs for all of the individual tracks. The only one that we did leave was the riser, because we ended up cutting a lot of the highs out there and it ended up just being too loud without the EQ, so we'll just leave that in there. But the rest of the tracks, all of the drum tracks and all the melody tracks, the bass track and so forth, now have no EQ in them, so let's go ahead and listen to what that sounds like. So you can definitely hear that the bass no longer cuts through, it's no longer full, rounding out that bottom end. Especially when the track starts again, there's no oomph behind anything. Everything just kind of seems pretty bland and ends up sounding overall much more amateur. So now what we'll do is quickly engage these and play this back for you. Okay, we've now gone back and enabled all of the EQs. Let's hear what this sounds like one more time. So really, once you listen to those back and forth, if you A/B them and rewind the video, you'll see there really is a night and day difference there, especially if you're wearing headphones. Alright, if you guys are still rocking with us, we can't thank you enough for being here. And we especially can't thank the people enough that are always here watching our live premieres, helping to build out our mobile music community. We hope that this video did explain the EQ fundamentals properly to you and can impress how important it is to make sure that every single instrument and sound is in its own frequency range. Without this, your mixes can end up sounding just super muddy and bland and really not have the energy and punch that the more professional sounding mixes do. Now, you may have seen videos on YouTube of a bunch of the pros going in there and fine-tuning with a bunch of little tiny notches and all of these crazy different EQ shapes and EQ curves, but really at the end of the day, when you're just starting out, you really don't need to worry about that too much. As always, the most important thing to do is use your ear and just pretty much do what sounds good to you. And just a reminder again, guys, that we are currently in the middle of a brand new contest where you can win one of 4 different prizes, with the grand prize again being that Arturia keyboard with that awesome looking inverted key bed. Once again, guys, we have it right here. We'll pull it up and show you. It is this brand new Arturia keyboard. So we really are looking forward to all your entries, guys. There's been a bunch already so far, and they are all sounding amazing. So if you want to enter the contest and see the rest of the prizes, make sure to go to mobilemusicpro.com/contest. But you better hurry up because this contest is ending November 25th, and we're going to reveal the winners on December 2nd. And of course, guys, don't forget about our brand new, recently launched Discord chat, where the conversation can continue long after our live premieres and live streams have ended. It's of course completely free to join, and you'll find that link in the description below. And as always, we have a ton more content coming on this channel, so if you do want to stay tuned with everything that we're doing, make sure to check out our free mailing list at mobilemusicpro.com. And so, until next time, everybody, keep talking music, and we'll see you later. Now, today's video is the first in a multi-part series that we're going to dive into. Now, today's video is the first video in a new ongoing series where we're going to dive into the... come on. Our goal here is to get as many... hair in my face. Our goal is to get... All right, almost.